Presley maniacal success. Elvis is claimed by many.
Elvis had clearly become marketable, with sales of Presley trinkets allowing his likeness to be owned by millions. Promoted on a gargantuan scale despite his stature in the eyes of some as less than a legitimate entertainer, he was everywhere, unavoidable. Tom Parker, known for his hip shooting line, "Don't try to explain it, just sell it," quickly hired a merchandising manager, Hank Saperstein, to review potential Elvis products and to take charge of sales. Saperstein was a veteran, with 17 years of selling similar spin-off items for Lassie, Wyatt Earp, Ding Dong School, and the Lone Ranger. It was Saperstein who put the prize in Kellogg's breakfast food. In no time flat, he was putting green-stitched Elvis jeans and Elvis charm bracelets onto millions of female teens. The merchandising of Elvis during his career year was both the key to his future and part of a long and often sordid part of showbiz. Nevertheless, it was blatantly obvious at this point in the cycle that many, even millions, wanted somehow to claim ownership of the rock and roll star. The real key to Elvis Presley's marketability lay in two aspects of his psychological makeup that were more natural and unobtrusive features to his unusual and sharp-edged public persona. Elvis's generosity and his compliance, his willingness to give and his unwillingness to assert himself as a private person, worked magically to create a very saleable public image. The tenure of photographer Alfred Wertheimer, originally given the exclusive assignment of covering Presley by RCA, not by Parker, was over. Presley's manager now insisted that journalists pay for interviews, and he refused to allow them to take photographs. This became policy, with the only sources of photos being fans' pictures of Elvis performing or movie studio promotion shots. In every other respect, Saperstein's operation, based in New York City, was in complete control. A whole new world was instantly created, ruled by the simplest laws of economics, a mail-order business in the creating and selling of an icon. Plaster busts of Elvis were one hot item. The Elvis Presley doll was snatched up by millions of teens willing to empty their wallets to have their very own Elvis. Sales actually outstripped production of two-tone women's shoes with the tops and linings emblazoned with a picture of Elvis holding a guitar. Advertising was geared to grab hold of emotions and not let go. Now you can have Elvis Presley for yourself. The message went on. He'll be your companion morning, noon, and nighttime, too, they guaranteed, before adding a cross between a disclaimer and an apology, saying that naturally, they couldn't sell the real thing. But they went on, "We can give you the next best thing, a real wonderful doll that looks just like Elvis, stands like Elvis, gyrates like Elvis, in fact does everything but sing." On and on went the merchandising of Elvis, searing into the consciousness all that he represented, as if by now anyone needed to be reminded. During a San Diego concert appearance in early April, the original idea for a colorful gold mine had struck after teens waiting in line for a Presley concert wrote messages of "We love Elvis" all over the concrete walls in lipstick. While the building's superintendent had to use a sandblaster to remove the graffiti, it was inspirational to Saperstein. 48 hours later, he said, "We were in the lipstick business." Autograph lipsticks in shades of Hound Dog Orange, Tutti Frutti Red, Tender Pink, and Cruel Red were bestsellers. "Always keep me on your lips," the ads urged. Sales of this phallic pagan war paint were projected at over $20 million a year. It was a feeding frenzy, with Elvis as bait. Saperstein still turned down 37 ideas in 1 week, calling them below standard, while arranging for the release of the newest item, a color portrait done in fluorescent paint that glowed in the dark. There was also an Elvis Presley game, the fabulous new game of love, in which participants could progress from getting to know you to learning to like you, then feeling can't do without you before hitting adolescent nirvana. Let's go steady. On a grander scale, another Elvis Presley game was being played out. While Elvis and his mother always believed in his powers and saw for him a great future, theirs was a world of superstition and magic, lacking in both motivation and creative ideas for bridging the chasm between dream and reality. Behind Elvis was a team of crafty media manipulators whose professional niche was known as exploitation. And behind the team of Parker, his assistant, Tom Diskin, and Hank Saperstein, was a legacy of manufacturing fame and creating celebrity that could position once obscure strangers on an intimate basis with the general public. All of Elvis's life, he had operated with illusion as a psychological construct that allowed him to avoid painful realities. Now he was part of illusion as a commercial enterprise, with himself at the center of the spotlight. Elvis actually lacked the motivation, ambition, and drive to promote himself. He did not push for publicity. He never came up with a single creative idea to market his image, nor did he ever veto those of others. He was compliant, passive, and disinterested. He simply showed up when asked and never made a fuss. His sneer was all-important, Hank Saperstein said of marketing the visual image of the entertainer. It was a good-looking, lovable sneer, and men and women both went for it. This was an unusual ingredient, he said. Elvis was very smart for someone with no education. He knew what he did not know. That is rare. And he let himself be surrounded by those who knew what to do to create, as Saperstein puts it, the phenomenon. Overly accommodating and lacking rebelliousness, once again Elvis went along for the ride like the little kid being walked to school by his mother. He allowed us to work with him, and he cooperated without interference, Saperstein recalled. The biggest thing I can say about creating Elvis Presley was that all he would ask was, just tell me when, where, and what I should do. He never threw a temper tantrum. He was never late. Even in the later years, he gave 110%. Now that, Saperstein said, is a talent. The team that created Elvis as a commodity within the purchasing power of any teen's weekly allowance or part-time job was thorough and inventive. Psychology 101. Nothing fancy. Nothing intricate was Saperstein's version, and his goal was lots of space on page one of the newspapers. Big, black headlines, Saperstein said was their single goal. Parker and I did not care what the headline said, just as long as it was out in front of the entire country. We wanted to manufacture a phenomenon. They do not happen just under their own power. Your media is your best ally. Do it right, and you don't even need a press agent. My mission was to create someone whose name and image flashes on in your mind without having to think. If you have to ask, who, then we did not do our job. Gift giving, the form of psychological self-help made legendary by Elvis, often provided Saperstein with fuel for the engines of fame. Elvis was one of the most generous people I have ever known, Saperstein said. I would make exploitation hay out of his generosity, over and over again. The first time was when he initially began to make some money. He bought not one, but 3 Cadillacs. Elvis in spending spree buys 3 Cadillacs, was the headline, Saperstein said, and again, they were off to the races. Tom Diskin was the master of detail, the Renaissance roadman. With a sense of care and conscientiousness, he would set up the last tiny logistical piece for Elvis's shows. Sometimes he went beyond the expected, those women screaming after Elvis from the very front rows, Saperstein noted. I think they were some of Tom's disciples. I would accuse him, and he never denied it. Parker, Saperstein recalled, was one of a kind. He was 100% honest. He was an admitted carny. He talked like a carny. He acted like a carny. I found that refreshing. And the head of RCA Records, George Merrick, did not want anything flashy done with Elvis's A&R. So Parker was perfect because he had a great instinct for what not to do, dishing out Elvis carefully and conservatively. The most dangerous thing was overexposure, Saperstein said. Parker and Saperstein consulted, when necessary, on which of the hundreds of incarnations of Elvis would be granted a license for merchandising. Parker's most salient personality characteristic was behind his basic business philosophy, as communicated to Saperstein. Don't turn anything down, Parker told his merchandising man. You never know when you might need him. What you do is just price yourself out of the market. This was wisdom that could be used. The 10 or so letters a week that Elvis received were regularly turned over to the U.S. Post Office, because Elvis was the target of every sexual aberration you can think of. Grandmothers to young people, it didn't matter. A promoter demonstrated a vinyl pillow in the shape of Elvis's lips, where one could apply lipstick and replicate Elvis's kiss. I threw him out of the office, Saperstein said. Another idea man came all the way from Chaminade, Louisiana, with plaster of Paris busts of Elvis to use as bookends for his albums. The Louisianan would not be refused. Saperstein pointed out design flaws of the invention. It was fragile and too small to be effective. He was not to be denied, and pressed Saperstein for a merchandising license. Remembering Parker's capitalistic dictum, Saperstein decided to price the man out of his office by charging an unheard of $50,000 as a cash advance. The man immediately wrote out a check for that amount. Saperstein countered by phoning the bank in front of the persistent inventor. His money was good, and the check was cashed. He never came back for the license, Saperstein said, who keeps it in a collection from the days of the feeding frenzy. Saperstein recalled the idea of targeting Boston, then a parochial town where, traditionally, books and movies considered as merely racy by the rest of the country were banned. Saperstein went to Boston and spoke with the right people. He told them it was their God-given duty to do something about this menace called Elvis. And when they did, I'd call the wire service and tell them, Elvis is banned in Boston. It worked. On the same trip, he would put in the mind of a DJ the idea to hold a contest, using several of Elvis's hairs as the prize. When the DJ found himself the recipient of 4,000 entries a week, this made Life magazine. It worked again, Saperstein noted. Elvis, a polarizer of people and their emotions, could effectively work both sides of the street in the same city. The promotion of Elvis's image could even make waves in the most unlikely circles. In Mexico, the nationalized newspapers and magazines reacted to the rise of this phenomenon from across the border by emphatically making the point that there was no such thing as Mexican rock and roll. This new dance rhythm would find no popular reception among the Mexican youth, they said, due to their strict upbringing and serious view toward life. American rock and roll, they noted, was a sign of moral degeneration. Then Saperstein's momentum shifted the tide. Not only did rock and roll catch on, it took off. Several prominent Mexican entertainers funded their own rock movie, in which they danced and sang the praises of Elvis and all that he stood for. Presley then became the focal point of heated debate and public displays of anger when he was misquoted in a radio interview as making a derogatory statement about Mexican women. It received tremendous publicity, U.S. government sources in Mexico City said. It would almost appear to be contrived. A campaign was begun to ban the playing of all Presley music, and a public protest was held in Chapultepec Park, where Presley's music, magazines, and photos were burned. The Mexican Communist Party even got involved. They had long banned rock music at their communist youth functions, and were expected to try to spark the bonfire meeting at the park. Then, the gringo spin control experts seized the heated passions of the moment. A new ad campaign was presented for the rock movie. The ad read, "Death to Elvis Presley. Burn his records, his pompadour, his photographs, his guitar, burn anything you want, but give yourself a treat with the true king of happiness and of rock and roll." Sales took off like never before, and Presley mania proved more exciting and far more lucrative than communism. Before the Steve Allen Show unleashed a cross-country dialogue, Ed Sullivan was quoted saying Presley was not my cup of tea. After Allen's show, he announced a September 9th appearance of the singer on the Toast of the Town. In August, Elvis, now backed by the long-established country group the Jordanaires, would gather informally in the living room of his Audubon Street house and rehearse, with June Juanico sitting on the floor, harmonizing with Elvis. To appear on the Ed Sullivan Show meant you had reached a pinnacle of sorts. The American family gathered every Sunday evening at 8 p.m. to share this hour of predictable, good, clean fun. Sullivan had, at age 54, reached the status of a secular high priest of entertainment for the entire generation of youth and for their parents. His show was the archetype for post-war family unity, and he was the embodiment of the antithesis of generation gap, a growing cultural concern. Described by those who knew him as a complex, angry, and vindictive man, Sullivan was morally and emotionally contradictory and extreme in his life and in his work. In his column, he attacked the biggest names in show business. In terms of sheer nastiness, his lifelong battle with Walter Winchell was legendary. Sullivan's every move was calculated to maintain his leadership position. In fact, Elvis Presley probably owes Walter Winchell a debt of gratitude for his initial Sullivan booking. Certainly, Sullivan was no fan of rock and roll. He was, however, aware that the Walter Winchell Show was to make its debut on NBC in 3 weeks. So Elvis Presley's undeniable popularity was only one reason Sullivan caved in and called Parker backstage at the Hudson Theater. Another reason was that Steve Allen had beaten Sullivan in the Trend-X ratings. After his Trend-X defeat, Sullivan reviewed tapes of the stage show appearances and declared Presley a pale replica of Johnny Ray, who had been on his show and who had shouted and got down and beat the floor and frothed at the mouth and every other thing. Presley, he decided, would work out. Between the initial arrangements with Parker and Presley's appearance, Sullivan was involved in a near-fatal car accident. Since Presley's schedule had him on the West Coast, neither one was appearing live, making the event somewhat anticlimactic for the New York studio audience. Tom Parker and Hank Saperstein's Elvis machine was about to enjoy a dazzling capstone to a year of hard work. They had pulled out all stops for the show. Oblivious to Elvis's complaints over being maligned as a sexual threat to the virtues and morals of millions of teens, they had instead capitalized on this angle. "It was our camp," Saperstein said, who first suggested to the Sullivan people, "crop him from the waist up." American families appeared to care less. 80% of all the televisions in the collective American living room were glued to the show, an estimated gathering of 54 million.